Good evening. My name is Colette Matthews Carter, and I am honored to serve as the president of the NAACP Syracuse Onondaga branch. And this evening, I'd like to welcome you to our August general membership meeting. We're delighted to have this month's meeting hosted by two of our committees, our Legal Redress Committee, as well as our Criminal Justice Committee. And so I am delighted that you're here. We're hoping that information that is shared this evening will really give you some insight to the kind of work that we do, also the needs that we have for the community to join us in this much needed work. A little bit about the NAACP. The NAACP, as I like to say, is one of the oldest and boldest and baddest civil rights organization. We've been fighting on the front line for over 100 years here in the city of Syracuse and Onondaga County. We've been very active for the last 6 decades. The mission of the NAACP is very simple. It is to eliminate race-based discrimination and to provide equity and equality in all facets of life. And so this evening, we're so excited because legal redress and criminal justice are two issues that truly impact communities of color. And so we're delighted to have our chair of our Legal Redress Committee, Barry Kawanter, as well as Mike Allen, who is co-chairing our Criminal Justice Committee. And they have a presentation to share with you all this evening that will hopefully, again, give you some insight to the kind of work that we do and how also you can be involved in this work. So I'm going to take this opportunity now to turn it over to Barry and to Mike. Let's welcome them.
Hello, everybody. My name is Barry Kawanter, and I'm the chair of the Legal Redress Committee for the NAACP, Syracuse and Onondaga County. And to my right or your left is Mike Allen, who needs to unmute himself. There you go. And Mike is the co-chair of the Criminal Justice Committee. The Legal Redress Committee, next slide, please. I'm waiting for our secretary to share a screen. So you have our names in front of you. And the next slide, please. The Legal Redress Committee, one slide back, please. There we go. Legal Redress Committee takes intake from people who contact the NAACP or by email or through a board member. These people often are assisting information or assistance for a variety of matters, usually relating to discrimination. We will discuss their situations with them, the facts that they allege, and discuss possible sources for redress, and often refer people to agencies or individuals that can help them. We document that intake as well as our response and any follow-up that's made. We also will investigate complaints that suggest systemic or egregious discrimination. What the Legal Redress Committee then does is we make recommendations to the Executive Committee for advocacy and other follow-up by our branch of the NAACP and work with officers and other committee heads to do that follow-up if it's called for. Mike, do you want to talk a little bit about the Criminal Justice Committee? And this language is drawn from the bylaws for the NAACP for all its branches.
Sure. Thank you. Again, my name is Mike Allen. I am a local attorney in Syracuse. I practice primarily in the criminal defense world. And the bulk of my practice is with indigent or poor persons through the Assigned Counsel program. And I wouldn't say I'm new. I'm kind of new to the committee, so forgive me a little bit. But just what's listed there, part of what we do, is my understanding, is to address the harsh and unfair processes in the criminal justice system, and especially those that result in racially disparate outcomes. And we push for fair and effective law enforcement practices. We seek accountability, transparency from local law enforcement agencies. And a lot of these things, I mean, you'll see it in the news, dealing with the transparency of the police departments, of, the reports that are in their files. We would push for those types of things and advocate for that, and advance the rights of formerly incarcerated persons. I will say that, the sentence that an individual receives in a criminal case does not end at the last court appearance or their release from jail or prison. It often follows them throughout their lives. And it's something that many people don't consider. And it's unfair, if you ask me. Somebody who had, a felony 10 years ago, but has proven himself to be a good, upstanding member of society since, shouldn't be barred from having a job or getting a loan or so on. So that's part of what we push for. And alternatives to incarceration and other criminal justice reforms, that's something as a defense attorney that I'm involved in on a daily basis. We have a lot of specialized courts in our county and in our city that deal specifically with certain types of crimes and activity, and try to give avenues for people not to have to spend considerable amounts of time incarcerated, and to try to help them turn their lives around.
Okay, so what we're going to do today is make this an informational session. Mike and I have come up with 4 different topic areas and a series of questions within each topic area. I think we only have enough time tonight to cover 2 of them. The first topic area is going to be courts and criminal versus civil law. The second topic area will be law enforcement issues. The third topic area will be discrimination in employment and public services. And the fourth legal area is representation resources. Let me also say that the NAACP will do everything we can to strategize with people about a situation of discrimination they bring to us, but we don't have the resources to provide any kind of representation. We may engage in some non-legal advocacy for particularly egregious cases, but we don't provide representation. We don't have a Syracuse and Onondaga County to work for us. There are legal resources at the national level in the NAACP, but usually those are not brought to bear for local issues. So if we can have the next slide, we'll take a look at some of the questions in the areas of courts and criminal versus civil law. Mike, I'm going to throw the first question to you. What's the difference between civil cases and criminal cases? Because my understanding is that everything basically falls into one of those 2 areas of law.
Yeah, so I could probably give a 4-day presentation on that first point. I'll try to make it brief. So civil is a citizen versus a citizen type action, where you're asking for some sort of relief, which can typically be monetary, or you can request a judge order that somebody do something or refrain from doing something. Whereas in a criminal case, it's the government, and specifically in New York, it's the people of the state of New York versus an individual based on some violation of the penal law, typically. And, the sentence in a criminal case, it can be anything from conditional discharge, which is to stay out of trouble, all the way up to, decades in prison, for example. So the aggrieved party in a criminal case is, the victim specifically, but they are not the ones to bring the action. It's the state of New York versus the individual. And the courts are set up much, much differently. There are completely different procedures for each one of them. The civil courts are generally civil practice laws and rules, and the criminal courts are the penal law and the criminal procedure laws. So, the lawyers that, practice in one area don't typically, practice in the other. Sometimes they do, but it can get a bit dicey because there's just so much there. And, in the criminal world, it's freedom and liberty at stake. And in the civil world, it's often money at stake.
And Mike, for the civil cases, it can also be an individual, a corporation, a business, an
Correct.
entity. It's not only individuals against individuals.
Correct.
And then,
yep.
And then when you say that it's the state versus an individual for the criminal situations, it's really a local prosecutor at the county level, but they're basing it on state law in most cases. Is that correct?
That is correct. So the state law is applicable throughout the states, the same law that everybody, practices, that everyone's supposed to adhere to. But each county is different. Each county has an elected district attorney. That district attorney sets the policies and the procedures and hires and fires the assistant district attorneys, who are the ones who show up to court and prosecute the matters, and everything from the traffic tickets all the way up to homicides. So that's, while it's the same law throughout the state, you'll often find kind of different applications based on, who the prosecutor is, what his theories are, and so on.
And I've learned over the years as a civil rights advocate to figure out why a case ends up in one court or another. And there's a whole list of different types of courts in Onondaga County. And this is sort of the way that I've understood it. And I'm going to the second question. What's the difference between the different types of local courts? So in city court, when it comes to criminal law, you're basically looking at misdemeanors and the first court appearance, which is called an arraignment. When something ends up in county court and it's a criminal charge, you're looking at a felony, a more serious charge. However, let's say the charge is because somebody is accused of doing something in a store in the town of DeWitt or the town of Manlius or in Cicero. Because New York State has something called the home rule law, each town, and in some cases, each village, has the right to have its own town court. So if you get charged with a crime outside the city, but in the county, but in the town of blank, your case may initially appear in front of a town judge in a town court.
That's correct.
Mike, can you say a little bit about how Supreme Court works? And I can comment on surrogates court, because surrogates court is basically looking at estates and wills after people die. And that's a state level court. And then the matrimonial court is where people's divorces are adjudicated when they become contested. But can you say something about Supreme and Appellate Court at the New York State level?
Yeah, so the Supreme Court is the trial court for civil matters in New York. And it's a funny way to say it, because in most states, the Supreme Court is the highest court.
Right.
For whatever reason, the New York State, when we, way back when we formed as a state, we decided the Supreme Court would be the lowest of the courts. So Supreme Court is the trial court that handles civil matters within their jurisdiction. And after the Supreme Court, they answer to the appellate division. And there are different departments within the appellate division. And each department handles a different geographical jurisdiction within the state. And they handle all appeals. And then the highest court is the Court of Appeals, and they are considered the highest court in the state. So Supreme Court itself, they have a pretty wide range of jurisdiction over a lot of different civil matters. But that's kind of the structure of the state on the civil side of it.
And the local appellate court is like the first level of appeal. It might go to another level of appeal in another part of the state before it goes to the Court of Appeals in Albany.
Right. So, well, we have the fourth department here. That's the Court of Appeals that handles the Syracuse area, and their cases are heard in Rochester typically, although everything's virtual now.
Yeah.
And then after that goes to the Court of Appeals in Albany. Yeah.
We also have family court, where criminal charges against minors are heard, and matters that have to do with the safety of minors or the custody of minors are heard. There's also something called integrated domestic violence court, and it's integrated because it may include matters that pertain to criminal law versus family law versus other sorts of matters. So when things are sent to the DV court, it's because it's bringing in different areas of law and different issues altogether. Drug treatment court is a type of court where people are given a chance to pursue a recovery, and the criminal charges that they're facing are sort of held off on to see if they can meet a number of prescribed steps in recovery. That's my understanding as a layperson. Did I miss anything on that, Mike?
No, I couldn't have said it better myself.
All right.
And drug court's kind of interesting in that in Syracuse, they're considered what's called a hub court, which means that any drug arrest in Onondaga County, you can make a motion at the local town or village court to have that case moved to Syracuse Drug Court, who then gains jurisdiction over the case for the remainder of the case. So,
but if people don't meet the steps the judge is expecting, then the whole consequences of the original crime they were charged with can come down on them. So it's both a benefit and a risk in that court. So it's a decision you got to really talk about with your lawyer.
big time, absolutely.
So another question we're going to cover in this area before we go to the next area is, what's a criminal charge? And a lot of people don't quite understand this. Criminal charges are misdemeanors, less serious charges. My understanding is that it's about a year in jail and likelihood of time in a local prison as opposed to a state prison. A felony is a more serious charge with a risk of more than a year in jail and a risk of going to state prison. But below those two sorts of crimes that are considered criminal and could remain on your record, there are also lesser charges that are called violations that are technically not crimes. A traffic ticket is a violation. A violation of a local ordinance may be a violation. There may still be a little time that is a possibility, and if there is time, you are entitled to a lawyer even with a violation. Mike, anything you want to clarify on that?
No, you hit the nail on the head.
Yay, that's good. I've been doing civil rights work for a while, so hopefully my understanding is solid. Why don't we go to the next slide and some law enforcement issues? Okay, the first one is going to be, and we've got a criminal defense lawyer too, so if police stop me when I'm walking or when I'm driving my car, can they search me? Can they search my car? And don't they need something called probable cause to do that? A lot of people don't understand this.
You know, a lot of lawyers don't either. It's a very kind of thick, dense area of law that is heavily litigated and appears in almost all cases. So first distinction is between walking and driving. There is a distinction because when you're driving in a car, the police typically aren't supposed to simply pull you over without some reason.
Some credible reason.
Some credible objective reason. And because what happens is once they turn those lights on, you're effectively detained and you're at their will and mercy. Now,
being detained means you're temporarily not free to go.
Temporarily, your movement is correct.
But you're not arrested.
You are not arrested yet. You're simply being detained. And you are detained every time you're pulled over, essentially. You can't just say no. You can't just drive away. Now, you know, that being said, you can challenge the reasons why they pulled you over and, for example, get evidence suppressed that they may have found unlawfully. But, you know, the law in New York is, you know, they have to have some justifiable objective reason to pull you over when you're driving a car.
But if they're just going to give you a ticket or tell you that your tail light's off, they shouldn't be going into your car and searching it just for something like this.
That's correct. So in New York, we have what's called the Deboer levels. And the Deboer levels are kind of levels of reason for what they're doing. And it's broken down into 4 levels. And the first level is objective, credible reason. They can approach, they can ask information, and this would be, you know, somebody walking down the street. There was a burglary nearby. Maybe they, you know, matched some small description. They can stop and ask the person some questions, you know. And then the next level up is founded suspicion. And at this level, they can ask kind of more pointed questions that, and those types of questions would lead one person to reasonably believe that they are suspected of a crime. And those questions can be more extended and accusatory, and they can focus on the criminality that the police officer believes has happened. And the third level is reasonable suspicion. And once you hit reasonable suspicion, they can forcibly detain the individual. They can frisk for weapons. They can pull the car over. So reasonable suspicion would fall under a traffic ticket.
So that's really detention when you get to, that's a formal detention when they get to that level. And they can actually handcuff you and put you in the back of the car.
If they believe, if they are in fear that there may be some weapons on the individual or something like that, then yes.
Or if they're going to escape.
Or if they're going to escape, that would be another reason, yeah.
And they can pat down on the outside of the clothing, but they're not supposed to go into your clothing or your belongings yet, right?
They aren't supposed to, no. You know, if they can articulate a reason why they went in there and it's a legal, lawful reason, felt like I'm trying to think of something here, felt like a stun gun. You know, I went in and it turns out it was a brick of cocaine. You know, I don't know, but you know, they aren't supposed to be able to be that intrusive. They're supposed to.
And they can't search your car yet unless you give them permission to do that.
Correct. And they ask every time, even if they have probable cause, which does give them the ability to search the car, they still typically ask permission because people often, you know, they don't understand their rights and they'll freely give them up. So
they could say no at that point, but they still can't stop the cops from doing something.
Well, so if they're at level 3 and they say no, the cops are supposed to, you know, stop. If they continue and after a hearing, the attorney can show that it was only a level 3, then everything that they found as a result of that stop can be suppressed, which is typically all the evidence that they have.
So somebody on the street, on the street could object, but not interfere. And probably at this point should keep their calm and wait till they have an attorney fighting for them to make the proper motions and fight in the courts. Don't try to interfere with what the police are doing, except verbally.
And the best way I can say it is that the best thing you can say in a situation like that is, you know, I don't consent to searches. I'm sorry, I don't consent to searches. Please let me call my lawyer. You know, and I understand it's hard for me to say something like that because when you're in the heat of the moment, when you're nervous, when there's an individual standing across from you, asking you pointed questions with a gun on his hip, you know, it's hard to slow down and focus on what you need to say. So I never fault people for being, you know, extraordinarily nervous.
And a lot of people of color are scared. They're literally scared that they won't live through the encounter. And I think that's realistic based on what we've seen in the United States for years. So you were going to talk about the 4th level. That would be arrest, right?
Yep. So 4th level is probable cause to arrest. So that means that the police have enough evidence to arrest you for some crime. And as part of that, they can search you. They can legally search you. They can, you know, search the car. You know, if it's a DWI incident and you've failed all the tests and you take the breathalyzer and alcohol comes up, they can then go in the car. They can search the car. They can do it for inventory. They can do it to look for evidence. You are now under arrest. You're going to be booked. So
you're going to be taken into custody at that point. But in some cases, you're not actually taken to jail. You may actually be given an appearance ticket with a date to appear at jail. And that's still an arrest, isn't it?
It still is an arrest. I have a lot of clients who say that to me, but I wasn't arrested. He gave me an appearance ticket. Well, actually, you were arrested. He was just being nice, I suppose. So the appearance ticket it's the, you know, commands you to appear at court at a certain day and time. And the, you know, the arrest has already taken place. Sometimes they'll have you do the fingerprints at the station. Sometimes you're expected to provide the fingerprints when you show up to court.
Yeah, I've seen people that are really surprised. They show up for arraignment, and during the time of the arraignment, they're asked to be fingerprinted, and they don't think that's right. but it's
Yep.
part of the whole process. But
Yep.
if somebody is arrested and it's a custodial arrest and they're taken to jail, how long does the system have to make sure that they go in front of a judge for arraignment?
You are supposed to be arraigned within 24 hours. I don't know that I've personally seen a case where somebody was held longer than that. So, at least in Syracuse, they're pretty good. We have centralized arraignment part, which is now kind of streamlined the whole process.
And
Which means
those are
that-
arraignments in the afternoon, right? So it's
Yep,
not
so that's
just
the-
morning arraignments.
Yep, that's the whole county, and CAP starts at 5:30 p.m. actually, and goes till about 10 at night. So if anybody's picked up, with enough time to get them processed before that, they're going to see a judge, typically.
And when
that
they
evening.
see a judge at arraignment, my understanding is that there's three things that happen.
Mhm.
You find out exactly what the charges are against you, because you have the whole picture from the police when you're arrested. Secondly, the judge will find out if you can afford to hire your own lawyer, and then they'll discuss bail. Is there anything else people should know about arraignment? And what's the current state of affairs with the assigned counsel program in people having attorneys at arraignment when they've been to jail?
Assigned counsel has been excellent about staffing all arraignments, and it
All
is kind
arraignments now.
all
Didn't used to be that way.
I'm sorry.
It didn't used to be that everybody had
No.
an attorney at arraignment, but now it is.
It is, and it's expected, and our goal is every single person who's arraigned with a crime needs to be represented, and it's important because the arraignment it's a recorded proceeding. Everything you say is, quote, on the record. So anything you say to the judge, can be brought up later. It could be used to prosecute you. The judge doesn't have to tell you that, but they normally do. They're normally pretty good about that.
So it's
And-
better to
and-
have an attorney speaking for you.
It is, because they can't rear me in front of the jury and ask me if I said something. So arraignments, you learn what your charges are. If it's bail eligible, you have to, make your bail arguments. But the main thing is just let your lawyer do his thing. He or she
her
knows
thing.
what he's doing. I threw it in there.
Okay, gotcha.
So, it's very important to just kind of stand aside and let her do the talking.
Right. And nowadays, what happens is that you will talk to that attorney before you go in front of the judge, even though if it's briefly, and it may actually be while you're still in jail. But when the judge assigns you an attorney for the case going forward, it's going to be a different attorney in most cases.
Now that's changed a lot too, because we have now a system where I am a core attorney in a town court.
Okay.
So if somebody's arraigned on an appearance ticket, I meet with them before court. As long as they showed up, I go through all the questions, make sure they qualify. And even if they don't qualify, I'll still stand up for them, during the proceeding. And, I typically take all those cases. That doesn't happen all the time, but it's a better way to do it, I think, because, you have a good first meeting with the client and, hope that lasts through the remainder of the case.
But if somebody's arraigned in city court, they're probably going to end up with a different attorney for their case as the case progresses.
Yeah, city
Yeah.
court, yes.
City court, yeah, just not town courts. Okay. Is there anything else that we should cover in law enforcement issues, or should we go to the next one so we have
No, I think we covered a lot.
Yep, I think we did. Why don't we go to the next slide? So the next slide has to do with discrimination in employment and also in public services. In legal talk, the public services are called public accommodation. So the first one, if I feel that I'm being discriminated against at work, what should I do? I'm going to start fielding this one. Just because you're being treated harshly or maybe even unfairly doesn't necessarily mean it's discrimination. A lot of people think that every time they're treated unfairly, it's discrimination. Not necessarily. But if you feel that either you're being treated badly, or you're being discriminated against because of who you are, your color, your religion, your national origin, whether you're a woman or a man, whether you're gay or straight, one of the first things that I say is document it. Make sure you're writing down what happened, when, what was said to you, what you said, so that you have that trail of information. The more specifics you have, the more prepared you are if you choose to take action. A lot of times you can try to address it internally if there's a human resources person separate from the boss or supervisor that is treating you badly. But you may also have recourse if it is particularly egregious outside the company. But the first thing I would say is try to keep your cool, because if you react to what's going in a way that is extreme, that reaction may give them a reason to terminate you. You don't want to react in such a way that is going to give them justification, a different justification for terminating you and firing you from your job. First thing would be start taking notes and figure out what your options are. An internal complaint, a complaint up the food chain, or an external complaint to an agency like the New York State Division of Human Rights. Mike, do you want to have any other comments about that?
No, I think that's good advice. Take notes, take notes, take notes.
Yeah, documentation is really important.
You know, and there's a difference between a boss who's a jerk and a boss who's a racist, or a boss who's, sexually harassing somebody. But, a lot of that stuff.
One of the things I always tell people is that you don't have a fundamental right to have a good boss. No, you don't. Just because the boss is treating you badly doesn't mean that it is outside the law.
And in New York, you don't have a fundamental right to have a job. I mean, it's a right to work. They can fire you, and they don't need much of a reason to, as long as it's not discriminatory, right? That's the Title IX stuff. They can do that. So
the first question I always ask is, are you working for a government agency, public employment, or are you working for a private employer? Because if you're working for a government agency, they still have to follow the Bill of Rights. They still have to give everybody equal treatment and equal protection under the law. So you may have more recourse if you're working for a government agency. But if you're working for a private company or a private person, you are in an employment at will state. So they can discipline, demote, for any reason or for no reason, except that they can't do it on the basis of your membership in a protected class, like your sex, your race, your religion, your sexual orientation, all the different categories that can be categories of discrimination that can be brought to the New York State Division of Human Rights. So just realize, even though they're treating you badly, it may not be against the law. And in order to prevail in a discrimination case, you really have to be able to present information that actually indicates that it was motivated by some kind of animus about who you are. And sometimes that's really hard to prove, because a lot of people that discriminate do it without saying anything that you can point to and say that proves discrimination. So how would somebody deal with it if they felt that a business or a service provider has treated them unfairly or in a discriminatory manner? If somebody brought that to you, Mike, what would you tell them? Let's say they were followed around in a...
Sorry, you broke up there. You there?
Harassing a staff person.
I lost the last about 10 seconds.
Okay. Do you have any suggestions about what somebody would do if they felt that a business or service provider treated them unfairly, like being followed around in a store or accused of shoplifting when there was absolutely nothing like that had happened, or accused of harassing staff when all you were doing is trying to get something that you needed?
Well, I think our smartphones have provided us with a pretty powerful tool.
Mhm.
If you're in that situation and you truly feel that you're being treated fairly, hit that record button. There's nothing wrong with that. You're in a public place. There's no law against recording. In terms of whether it's actionable, I don't practice that type of law, so I'm not equipped to kind of answer that question. But sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. It's always very fact specific. But that recording, and in New York, it's a one-party consent state. So if you didn't feel comfortable, kind of putting a camera in somebody's face, you can hit the record button and stick it in your pocket and get the audio, for example, which is better than nothing. And document what, you want to, if you don't have a camera or you can't record, you go outside afterwards and get a notebook and write down
everything
exactly
down.
what happened, and
Yeah.
be fact specific, time, place, witnesses, get names of other individuals and their phone numbers, emails if you can.
And
And
who
then
said what and what you said in response, and then how they responded, the back and forth, writing it all
Absolutely.
down.
Yeah.
You could also ask for a manager and ask to speak to a manager calmly. And if the manager is not available, ask for the manager's contact info or the store owner's info or the corporate office that handles customer complaints. If there was something really egregious, you can also go to the of Human Rights and make a claim. And we'll talk about that in a sec. How about store security? Can store security prevent somebody from leaving a store when they think they did something wrong? I mean, they're not police officers. They're just rent-a-badges.
They aren't, and that gets us into a very kind of dicey area. And the biggest issue for the store is, well, what happens if they're wrong, if the person was innocent and, it was a false accusation, and they detain somebody and cause them some sort of physical injury? They don't enjoy the types of immunities that police officers have. So I don't know of a store that would tell their employees to physically restrain somebody who committed a crime. I think most of them say, if they protest, let them go. The police will deal with them later. Technically, that you can, as under a citizen's arrest, detain somebody if you witnessed the crime yourself, but it's at your peril. So, if anything happens, if you're wrong, there can be a whole litany of civil suits against the individual doing the detaining. And even if the person did something wrong and they attempted to escape and the, rent-a-cop tackled them and broke their leg, they still might be on the hook civilly.
Right.
So,
they may be on the hook for a lawsuit. But I've
Yeah.
heard of people being accused of a crime in a store, and the store security detains them, tries to stop them from leaving while the cops are coming
Mhm.
to deal with the situation. So that may be something likely, but the store security doesn't have the ability to arrest or handcuff people.
No.
That would be
No.
a violation of somebody's rights.
Correct.
Okay. Why don't we go on to the next area? And then maybe if there are any questions or things we haven't covered, we can go back on them. So next slide, please. So a lot of people that come to me with problems and are looking for directions are people that really don't have the money to hire their own private attorney. And a lot of people who are facing criminal charges also can't afford an attorney. And so one is provided for them. And that's a lot of Mike Allen's clients end up, he becomes appointed for them because they can't afford an attorney. So the resources that there are for people with civil legal problems is a real issue throughout the country, but especially in New York, because you're entitled to a lawyer if you're facing a criminal charge where you could be incarcerated. You're entitled to a lawyer for that, but you're not necessarily entitled to a lawyer if it's a civil claim. So that's why organizations like Legal Aid and Legal Services are out there for people that are lower income. They don't necessarily take every case, and they're going to look at people's income before they take a case, but they're there to provide civil legal services for people that can't afford them. On the criminal side, are they also looking at people's income before they get an attorney, or is there a point at which their expenses and their income are looked at?
So I have a financial worksheet I go through with my clients, and it really it used to be, you know, just above the poverty level, you didn't qualify. That's been raised pretty dramatically, and most people now qualify for a free attorney.
Mm-hmm.
And it's based on family size and income and percentage above poverty level, stuff like that. And then there are situations that they automatically qualify, such as if they're receiving any sort of public assistance. But it's gotten much better. And you know, that's to the benefit of hard work, like people like you did on Hurr Herring and so on. So
Mike is referring to a class action lawsuit that the New York Civil Liberties brought called Hurr Herring. And that really has revolutionized the way that indigent defense is done in New York State, and especially in Onondaga County. So when Mike says it's a lot better, it's because of some of the changes that were brought by that lawsuit, like making the financial eligibility guidelines a lot more realistic. People shouldn't go into debt for the rest of their lives just because they have to get an attorney to defend their son or to defend themselves.
No, you used to be, if you owned a house, you automatically did not qualify.
No matter what the equity in your house was or how much you still owed on it.
Didn't matter. You're a homeowner, you can afford an attorney. And it's not like that anymore. And that wasn't reasonable. I mean, you know, plenty of people are just skating by. So.
And a lot of people can't get a loan. Attorney
and
services.
that, and imagine being told, I'm sorry, but you have to sell your house in order to fight this, you know.
That doesn't make any sense. So on the civil side, legal services and legal aid are out there, and legal services is on Warren Street, and legal aid, where is their address now? Are they still on Warren Street as well, or have they?
Hiscox Legal Aid?
Right.
Yes, they are still on Warren.
Still on Warren Street. Hiscox Legal Aid Society does the representation in family court for people who cannot afford an attorney. And they do that with a contract with Onondaga County. They also have other programs. So Legal Aid does the criminal appeals for people who do not have the money to hire their own appeal lawyer. And there are other programs that each organization will have. Legal Services also has lawyers that specialize in particular areas of law, mental hygiene law, for people who are have mental health issues, and other sorts of law. They also have lawyers there for people in the LGBT community with particular expertise. So you may need to call both to figure out which organization is going to be more appropriate for your situation, but their services are free based on income guidelines. Then there's the New York State Division of Human Rights. That is a state agency whose mission is to enforce the New York State human rights laws that prohibit discrimination on the basis of things like race, sex, religion, sexual orientation in employment, housing, and public accommodations, those public services that we talked about before. You do not need an attorney to make a claim in the State Division of Human Rights. You can go out online and fill out a complaint form as detailed as you can and attach backup materials and extra pages of writing and either get it notarized and mail it in or put it in on the computer and submit it that way. However, if your discrimination case is against a company or an institution that has lawyers or the money to pay for lawyers, you may be going up against well-paid lawyers and it's just you. You may want to seek the advice of a lawyer or representation in some cases that are really complicated and not clear-cut. What's going to happen in the Division of Human Rights is you're going to put in your claim, and then a copy of your claim is going to go to the people that you complained about, the employer, the landlord, the business, and they become the respondent. And then they're going to send back to the Division of Human Rights a response called a rebuttal that's going to say, no, this didn't happen, and they're a bad person or a bad employee or a bad tenant. At that point, you can make a response to the rebuttal and say, no, that's not true. This is what really happened. And then it's assigned to an investigator. And then the investigator asks you questions and asks the respondent questions. And there may even be a meeting with both of you present where the investigator is in charge of what happens. And then the investigator takes all that information and makes a recommendation to their boss as to whether there's probable cause to believe the discrimination happened, or there's not probable cause to believe the discrimination happened. And if there is probable cause, at that point, you can get a private attorney and try to launch a lawsuit if somebody will take it. Or the case can go in front of an administrative law judge with a lawyer from the division pursuing the case on behalf of New York State, with you as the example, not on behalf of you and your interests alone. So it's a complicated process, but it is free. And I do know people who have gotten findings of probable cause and have come to settlements that took away some of the damage to themselves, at least monetarily. I don't know how familiar you are with the division's cases, Mike. Do you have anything else to add about that?
No, I've handled a couple cases in the Division of Human Rights, both on the side of the complainant and the respondent, and it's a streamlined process. It's very, non-lawyer friendly.
It's user friendly.
It's user friendly. Yeah, it's not a reams and reams of paperwork and motions and filings and all that. And in my estimation, in my opinion, they do a good job. So.
In my estimation, they do as well. And it was designed so that people can bring cases without having to pay any money and without having to hire an attorney. So it can work well in people's favor. You just have to be really specific and detailed, and that documentation of what you experienced really comes into play if you bring a case in front of the division, because it's your proof of what you alleged happened. They're also going to look at whether you were treated differently than people of other races, or people without disabilities if you have a disability, or people that are straight if you were alleging discrimination because you're gay. So they're going to look at whether there was a pattern of discrimination or whether you significantly were treated differently than people who don't belong to the protected class that you're saying you were discriminated against because you belong to it. So how about local or statewide advocacy organizations? Sometimes it can help to have an organization like the NAACP pushing for change or pushing for redress with you. Remember, we don't have the capacity locally in the branch to represent people, but sometimes will engage in non-legal advocacy with the powers that be to try to address a wrong. And there's other organizations out there at the state level that can also assist. One example might be the National Action Network. There may be, if it's a workers' issue, there may be a workers' organization or a union, and that's something I should probably mention. Another question I always ask people when they bring me an employment discrimination case is, are you in a union? Because if what was done to you is in violation of the union contract, a lot of times having your union fight for you to fight that violation is usually the most effective avenue of redress. And I believe in unions. Not all unions fight as hard as others, but that's usually going to be the most effective avenue and immediate avenue for you to get redress. Legal cases can take months, years to actually get a result. There's also some statewide organizations that may help. For instance, on disability claims, there's an organization called Disability Rights New York. Mike and I recently had an interaction where he had a reproductive rights case and contacted me, and I was able to clue him into some expertise that they had at the New York Civil Liberties Union, and it helped him be able to get the resources to strategize to help that client effectively. So even if a state organization—
Well, give yourself more credit. I was walking alone in the wilderness on that case, and you guided me to the light, so thank you.
Well, look, that sort of leads us to the next question is, how do I find a good private lawyer to help me? Networking, people's experience. If you know somebody and trust them, they may have a reference for you, somebody that's treated them well. You come to a respected advocate in the community, like Bishop Collette, our president, or some of the other leaders of the NAACP over the years. They'll know the attorneys that don't express bias. A lot of times what I'll do is refer somebody to an attorney like Mike, who treats people with dignity and equality. But there are lawyers out there that are decent, that are skilled, that care, and are not biased against people because who they are.
And if I can just add to that,
Yeah.
the bar associations, my experience has been, I've had friends in other states have issues that needed legal attention. I've called bar associations and I've never had a complaint. And Onondaga County has a good bar association as well.
It does. And they have a lawyer referral system, but they can tell you what specialty the lawyer is in. They can't necessarily tell you this guy is trustworthy, this gal is trustworthy, or this person has not had complaints about them, or this one has. So that's why trusted sources within your own community may be good for referrals, but don't go with the first referral. Ask a couple of people, and then certain names may end up popping up. Also, another thing about lawyers' specialties, a lawyer who does family law usually doesn't have the expertise to do labor and employment law. Somebody who does wills and estates usually doesn't have the experience to handle criminal defense. Just like with doctors, they're very specialized. Law is often also really specialized. If you've got a criminal defense matter, please get an experienced criminal defense attorney. They know the people, they know the procedures, they know the systems. One of the things that people like Mike and I can do, and other people in the community that have experience, is we can tell you, what area of law does this fall into? What kind of specialty lawyer do you need to find? Mike, anything to add?
No, I mean, as attorneys, we, especially myself, I have my niche, criminal law. That's my main thing. And I do some family court stuff as well. And I cherry pick those cases, but for the most part, law is it's a vast, there's lots of different avenues, lots of different areas of expertise, and it's difficult for any one person to know them all. So absolutely correct.
And non-lawyers like me can often point you in the right direction, even though we can't actually fight for you in court. And that's something the NAACP can do. We can talk to you about some of the strong points, some of the weaknesses that may be in your case, some of the things that you might do as you go along to try to protect yourself. We can't represent you. We may or may not have the resources even to do non-legal advocacy, but pointing people in the right direction so that they're not just spinning their wheels and getting frustrated or calling lawyer, 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 lawyer and getting rejected. That's something that we're more than happy to do. We want to be a resource and we want to make change, and we want as equally and fairly as possible. That would make things a much better world. We're not there yet, but there are people in the community that do care, that are trying to work towards that. And with that, I'd like to turn it to anybody that might have a question, or back to Bishop Collette, because I think we're right about time, 3 or 4 minutes left. And Michael, thank you very much for joining me.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Bishop, you want to take it from here?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, let me say thank you. Thank you so much, Barry and Mike, for putting together such an informative presentation. These are issues that are so relevant and pertinent to the communities that we serve. And there's so much misinformation out there. And I think that this presentation hopefully will shed some light on some things as we continue to do this great work. So thank you, thank you, thank you for this. And for anyone out there who is interested in being a part of the NAACP, even being a part of the Legal Redress Committee or the Criminal Justice Committee, you can feel free to send an email to the NAACP president, syr@gmail.com, or you can log on to our website at syracusenaacp.com. If you reach out, I will put you in touch with the right persons and people to get involved with our organization. We are definitely on the front lines. And again, this was very, very helpful and informative for this evening. And hopefully people will find it as such. So thank you, Barry. Thank you, Mike, for your time tonight. We thank our membership chair, Sherry Dozier Owens in the background, and all of our members who do such great work for the people of our community. So having said that, have a good night. Stay cool. If you are outside, stay cool, and we will see you next month.
I'm trying to stay cool and I'm inside. It's just not working.
Exactly.
Until then.
Thank you.